The sun dipped low behind the rolling hills, casting the village in a warm golden glow. Nestled between dense forests and open plains, the village stood like an ancient sentinel, guarding secrets untold. Narrow paths wound through clusters of thatched roof huts, their earthen walls glowing softly under the embrace of the fading sunlight. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, mingling with the rhythmic thud of pestles pounding millet. The aroma of roasted yams and freshly brewed palm wine lingered in the cool evening air. As dusk settled, the villagers gathered around the central baobab tree, a tree so ancient that its gnarled roots seemed to carry the weight of generations past. The council of elders, dressed in flowing robes adorned with intricate patterns, sat in a semicircle. Their faces, carved by time, bore wisdom that the villagers revered. It was under this tree that disputes were settled, tales were shared, and traditions upheld. Tonight we honor the spirits. An elder's voice boomed, his walking stick tapping the earth for emphasis. For it is their guidance that protects us from the darkness that lurks beyond the hills. The villagers murmured in agreement, their faces solemn. The elders spoke with authority, and their words were rarely questioned. In this village, tradition was law, and law was life. At the edge of the village, the once grand family compound of Baba Kofi stood in quiet contrast to its surroundings. Its clay walls, once smooth and painted in vibrant patterns, now bore cracks that ran deep, like scars, on aging skin. The thatched roof sagged in places, a silent witness to years of neglect. Once a symbol of wealth and pride, the compound now reflected the weight of internal strife. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Baba Kofi, a tall man with a commanding presence, sat in the center of the courtyard, his gaze fixed. On the horizon, his stern face was a mask of authority, his eyes hard like granite. Beside him, Zainab, his second wife, busied herself with stirring a pot of stew, her movements sharp and deliberate, her lips pressed into a thin line as she cast furtive glances toward Amina, her stepdaughter. Amina, perched on a low stool in a corner, held a book close to her chest. Her slender fingers traced the worn edges of its cover. A gift from her late mother. She glanced up, her dark eyes scanning the compound, her thoughts far beyond its crumbling walls. She dreamed of classrooms, of knowledge, of a world that stretched far beyond the village boundaries. "You waste your time with that book again," Zainab muttered, her voice laced with disdain. "What good will it do you? No man wants a wife. Who knows more than him?" Amina's grip tightened on the book. She opened her mouth to respond, but stopped herself. Her silence spoke louder than words. Baba Kofi's deep voice broke the stillness. "Zainab is right," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. "Your duty is to this family, Amina, not to dreams that lead to nowhere." Amina swallowed hard, her head bowing slightly, but inside her, a fire burned, a quiet rebellion against the weight of expectation. Later that evening, as the stars lit up the vast African sky, Amina slipped away from the compound. She found solace at the edge of the forest, where the trees whispered secrets to the wind. Sitting on a rock, she opened her book, its pages illuminated by the moonlight. This was her refuge, her sanctuary. Here, she could dream freely, unburdened by the voices that sought to tether her to tradition. But even in her solitude, she felt the pull of her father's expectations and the sting of Zainab's words. They did not see her potential, only her defiance. She sighed, gazing at the horizon where her dreams seemed to lie, just out of reach. Baba Kofi sat in the courtyard, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the cooking fire. His mind wandered to his ancestors, their teachings, and the traditions he had sworn to uphold. The world was changing, and he felt its pull, like the tide against a stone. But he would not yield. Change is a poison, he muttered under his breath. It weakens the roots of a family. Amina must learn her place. His voice carried to Zainab, who sat nearby, her hands busy weaving a basket. She smiled faintly, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Amina's defiance was a thorn in her side, but one she was determined to remove. In Amina's beauty and intelligence, Zainab saw a threat, a reflection of everything she wished she could be. "Don't worry, my husband," she said sweetly, though her words dripped with malice. "She will learn, even if it takes time." The following morning, the villagers buzzed with whispers of a stranger who had been seen near the forest. He was a tall, shadowy figure, with a walking stick that seemed too ornate for an ordinary traveler. Those who had glimpsed him spoke of his piercing eyes and the way he seemed to vanish into the trees as quickly as he appeared. "Who is he?" a woman asked, her voice hushed. The elders dismissed the rumors, but the villagers remained uneasy. Strangers rarely came to their village, and when they did, it was often a harbinger of change. In the quiet of her room, Amina stumbled upon an old chest belonging to her late mother. Inside, buried beneath layers of fabric, she found an object that took her breath away, a calabash, intricately carved with symbols she did not recognize. As she held it, the carvings seemed to glow faintly under her touch. A chill ran down her spine, but she could not tear her eyes away. Her heart raced as questions flooded her mind. What was this? Why had her mother hidden it? And why did it feel as though it pulsed with an energy of its own? That evening, as the villagers gathered around the baobab tree for the griot's tale, his voice rose and fell like the wind, weaving a story of prophecy and fate. "There will come a night," he intoned, his eyes scanning the crowd, "when the past will demand its reckoning. The blood of betrayal will call out, and only the brave will answer." The villagers shuddered, their imaginations alight with fear and curiosity. Amina sat among them, clutching the calabash hidden beneath her shawl. Her heart pounded as the griot's words seemed to echo her thoughts, foreshadowing the journey that awaited her. Amina sat on the floor of her small room, the calabash resting in her lap. The carvings on its surface shimmered faintly, as if the object itself was alive. Her fingers traced the intricate designs, and as her touch lingered, a sudden warmth emanated from the calabash, spreading through her palms and into her chest. Her breath hitched as her vision blurred, and then, like a veil being lifted, images began to swirl before her. She saw her late mother, younger and vibrant, standing in the courtyard, but her face was etched with worry. A heated argument unfolded between her and Baba Kofi, their words muted, but their emotions loud. In the background, a shadowy figure loomed, holding the calabash. Amina gasped and released the object, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you trying to tell me, Mama?" she whispered into the silence of her room. But the calabash, now still, gave no answer. The visions haunted her in the days that followed, appearing every time she touched the calabash. Each fragment revealed more of her family's secrets, betrayals, lies, and decisions that rippled through the generations. She couldn't escape the feeling that the calabash was trying to guide her towards something. Though she didn't yet know what, Zainab watched Amina from across the courtyard, her eyes narrowing. She had noticed the girl spending more and more time alone, clutching that peculiar object. It unsettled her. "What foolishness are you up to now, Amina?" Zainab called out, her voice sharp. Amina turned but said nothing, her gaze defiant. Zainab strode toward her, gesturing at the calabash. "That thing is cursed. Do you want to bring misfortune upon this family? Put it away. It belonged to my mother, Amina said quietly, though her tone was firm. Your mother, Zainab's voice faltered, then turned bitter. She brought nothing but trouble, and now you're following in her footsteps. Always dreaming of things beyond your place. Always thinking you're better than us. Amina's jaw tightened. I'm not trying to be better than anyone. You just want to shame this family. Zainab interrupted, her voice rising. You think your books and that cursed object will make you great? They won't. You're a burden, Amina, and nothing more. The words cut deep, but Amina refused to let Zainab see her pain. She turned and walked away, clutching the calabash tighter. Behind her, Zainab's expression darkened, jealousy twisting her features. Baba Kofi sat at the head of the courtyard, his staff resting against his knee. His voice boomed, commanding the attention of his family. Amina, you will not leave this village. Amina stood before him, her shoulders squared. But, Baba, the scholarship ceremony is tomorrow. They've chosen me to represent the village. You are not going. Baba Kofi repeated, his tone final. Your place is here, preparing for marriage. What use is a scholarship to a woman? It will not feed this family, or bring honor to our name. Amina's voice quivered, but she pressed on. Baba, this is an opportunity to learn, to grow. I can bring more to this family than just a dowry. Baba Kofi's hand slammed against the armrest of his chair. Enough. Do you think yourself above our traditions? Do you wish to bring shame to our lineage by defying me? The courtyard fell silent as the villagers, drawn by the commotion, gathered at the edges. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some sympathetic, others critical. Amina's heart sank, but she held her ground. I only want to honor Mama's wishes. She believed in me. Your mother. Baba Kofi's voice softened momentarily, but he quickly steeled himself. Your mother is gone, and you will. Obey me, Amina. This is my final word. Tears welled in Amina's eyes, but she turned and walked away, the weight of disappointment heavy on her shoulders. Kojo sat on a low stool, watching the scene unfold. His sister's pain was evident, but so was their father's resolve. Torn between the two, Kojo said nothing, his silence gnawing at him. Later that night, he found Amina sitting outside her room, the calabash resting at her feet. She looked up as he approached. You could have said something, she said, her voice quiet but laced with hurt. I didn't know what to say, Kojo admitted, sitting beside her. Baba is stubborn, you know that, so you choose silence. Amina shot back. How can you stand by and let him crush my dreams? Kojo looked away, shame coloring his face. It's not that simple, Amina. I'm trying to keep the peace. If I speak against him, it will only make things worse. Worse for you or for me? Amina asked, her tone sharper now. Kojo didn't respond. Instead, his eyes fell on the calabash. That thing. It's causing all this trouble. Maybe you should leave it alone. Amina picked it up, cradling it protectively. You don't understand. This calabash is the key to everything. Mama's secrets, our family's past. I can feel it. Kojo hesitated, then stood. Be careful, Amina. Some doors are better, left closed. In the days that followed, Zainab's whispers turned into full-fledged rumors. She spoke to anyone who would listen, painting Amina as a rebellious daughter who disrespected her father and dishonored their traditions. She spends her days with cursed objects and foolish dreams, Zainab would say, her voice dripping with feigned concern. What good will come of it? The villagers, once proud of Amina's achievements, began to view her with suspicion. Children whispered behind her back, and elders frowned when she passed. "She's bringing shame to her family," one woman said. "Her poor father must be at his wits' end." Zainab, satisfied with the growing divide, approached Baba Kofi. "The villagers are talking, my husband," she said, her tone somber. "You must act before Amina's behavior ruins us all." Baba Kofi nodded, his jaw tight. "I will handle it." One evening, as the sun dipped low, the mysterious stranger appeared at the edge of the village. He approached Amina while she was gathering water, his figure tall and cloaked in shadow. "You are Amina," he said, his voice deep and steady. Amina stared at him, her guard up. "Who are you?" "I am someone who knows your family's past," he replied. "And your future." He gestured to the calabash in her arms. "That object you hold. It is not just a relic. It is a curse, born of betrayal and greed." Amina frowned. "What are you talking about?" The stranger stepped closer. "Generations ago, your ancestors stole the calabash from a neighboring village. Its power was meant to protect their people. But in taking it, your family sealed a curse upon themselves, a curse of discord and jealousy." Amina's grip tightened on the calabash. "And what am I supposed to do?" "Break the cycle," the stranger said simply. "But be warned, it will require great sacrifice." The villagers' whispers grew louder, and Amina felt their judgment, like a weight on her chest. She locked herself in her room, clutching the calabash as the visions became more vivid. They showed her mother's struggles, her father's mistakes, and the tangled web of lies that bound their family. "I will find the truth," she whispered, her voice resolute. "No matter the cost." In the quiet of the night, the calabash glowed faintly, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. Somewhere in the village, the griot's words echoed like a distant drumbeat. "There will come a reckoning, and the brave must rise to meet it." The night was thick with silence, the kind that clung to the air and made every creak of the earth seem louder. The villagers had long since extinguished their lamps, and only the distant hum of crickets disturbed the stillness. In her room, Amina sat cross-legged on the floor, the calabash resting in her lap. The carving shimmered faintly, casting eerie shadows on the mud walls. Her fingers hovered above its surface, hesitating, as if the object itself breathed beneath her touch. Outside, the moon hung low, bathing the village in silver light. A single dog barked in the distance, its call sharp and foreboding. The elders, resting in their respective compounds, stirred uneasily in their sleep. Something unseen was shifting, an energy that pulsed like the heartbeat of the land. Then it happened. A deafening bang tore through the silence, a sound so sudden and powerful it seemed to shake the very ground. Villagers awoke in panic, scrambling for their lanterns and rushing toward the source of the noise. Smoke billowed from Amina's room, curling upward like a snake, its tendrils reaching for the sky. The air was thick with tension, fear gripping every heart. Baba Kofi was the first to reach the room, his staff clutched tightly in his hand. He kicked open the door, the force sending a cloud of smoke swirling around him. Inside, Amina lay motionless. On the floor, the shattered remains of the calabash scattered around her. The symbols that had once adorned the calabash now glowed faintly on her skin, pulsing with an unearthly light. Zainab pushed past Baba Kofi, her face pale and twisted with fear. "What has she done?" she cried, clutching her chest, as if the sight before her might stop her heart. "What madness is this?" The villagers crowded at the doorway, their torches casting flickering light over the chaotic scene. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some laced with fear, others with anger. "She has brought a curse upon us," one elder whispered. "This is the work of forbidden spirits." Baba Kofi's face darkened with rage. He turned toward the gathering crowd, his voice booming above the commotion. "This is my house, my family. Leave at once." But his words carried little weight against the tide of panic that swept through the villagers. From the back of the crowd, a voice rose above the rest, a deep, steady voice that seemed to still the air. "Let them stay," the stranger said, stepping forward. His tall frame was shrouded in a dark cloak, and his eyes, sharp and piercing, seemed to look through the smoke and chaos, as though they saw the truth buried within. The villagers parted to let him through, their murmurs falling to hushed whispers. Baba Kofi glared at the stranger, his grip tightening on his staff. "Who are you to walk into my house uninvited?" he demanded. "I am one who knows the weight of this family's deeds," the stranger replied, his voice calm but firm. He gestured to the broken calabash, its pieces still glowing faintly on the floor. "And the burden that has fallen upon this girl." The room fell silent as the stranger knelt beside Amina. He placed a hand gently on her forehead, his expression unreadable. "This," he said, his voice carrying an air of finality, "is the reckoning that was foretold." "What reckoning?" Zainab snapped, her fear giving way to anger. "What nonsense are you speaking?" The stranger stood, his gaze steady as it met hers. "Generations ago, this family stole the calabash from its rightful keepers, invoking a curse that would bring discord and jealousy to its lineage. The girl's mother tried to break it but could not. Now it falls to her." Baba Kofi's face flushed with anger. "Lies! My family has done no such thing." The stranger shook his head. The visions she saw were not lies. They were the truth, buried by time and pride. Her mother saw the curse's grip tightening around this family, and she tried to guide Amina toward the path of redemption. A soft groan broke the tension as Amina stirred, her eyes flooded open, her body trembling as she pushed herself upright. The villagers gasped as the symbols on her skin flickered once more before fading into nothingness. "Amina," Baba Kofi said, his voice softer now, a flicker of concern breaking through his anger. "What have you done?" Amina's voice was weak but steady. "I saw it, Baba. The truth. The calabash was never ours. It was stolen, and the curse. It has been tearing us apart ever since." Zainab's face twisted with denial. "She's delirious. She doesn't know what she's saying." "No," Amina said firmly, her strength returning. "I know exactly what I'm saying. Mama knew the truth, but she was too afraid to speak. She sacrificed her dreams, her happiness, for this family. And you?" She turned to Zainab, her eyes blazing. "You let your jealousy poison this house." Zainab stepped back, her hands trembling. "How dare you?" "Enough!" Kojo's voice rang out, silencing the room. He stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Amina is right. We've all been blind, but it's time to face the truth." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their whispers growing louder. "What do we do now?" one of the elders asked. The stranger stepped forward once more. "There is only one path forward. The family must return what was stolen. Only then can the curse be lifted." The villagers turned to Baba Kofi, their eyes expectant. He stood frozen, his pride warring with the guilt that now weighed heavily on his shoulders. Finally, he knelt before Amina, his head bowed. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "I see that now. You have shown more courage than I ever could." The crowd murmured in shock as Baba Kofi reached out, his hands trembling. "Will you forgive me?" Amina's eyes filled with tears. "But," she nodded, "only if we make this right. Together." The villagers, moved by the scene, began to rally around the family, their fear giving way to hope. For the first time in generations, the path to healing seemed within reach. The calabash sat heavy in Amina's hands. The carvings on its surface, now dulled, but its weight felt heavier than ever before. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the wind outside. She looked at it, her mind racing with the stories it had shown her. The betrayals, the lies, and the curse that had bound her family for generations. This must end, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. She knew what needed to be done. The calabash had to be returned to its rightful place, back to the village from which it was stolen. The words of the elders echoed in her mind. That path is not safe, they had warned. The forests are unkind to lone travelers. You will face danger, child. But Amina's resolve was unshakable. She rose to her feet, clutching the calabash tightly. If this curse is to be lifted, I must go. There is no other way. Later that night, as she prepared to leave, Kojo stepped into her room. His face was pale, his brows furrowed with concern. Amina, you're really going to do this? He asked. She nodded. I have no choice, Kojo. This curse has torn our family apart for too long. It's time to make things right. For a moment, Kojo was silent, his eyes flickering with hesitation. Then, he sighed. If you're going, I'm going with you. Amina blinked in surprise. Kojo, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He interrupted firmly. I've stood by silently for too long. You've been braver than all of us. Amina, it's time I did something too. Tears welled in Amina's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Thank you, she whispered. Kojo smiled faintly and placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll do this together. The siblings left the village at dawn, the first rays of sunlight filtering through the dense canopy of trees. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping, birds and rustling leaves, but there was an ominous stillness beneath it all. Amina and Kojo tread carefully, their footsteps crunching softly on the forest floor. Hours turned into days as they navigated the treacherous terrain. They crossed rushing rivers, climbed steep hills, and braved the howls of wild animals that echoed in the night. The journey was grueling, and each step seemed heavier than the last. One evening, as they rested by a small fire, an old man from a nearby village approached them. His back was hunched, and his walking stick tapped rhythmically against the ground as he drew closer. You carry something sacred, the man said, his voice raspy but strong. His eyes fell on the calabash in Amina's hands. Do you know its story? Amina nodded. I know it was stolen by my ancestors. I'm returning it to its rightful home. The man smiled, his face creasing like aged bark. It is a heavy burden you carry, child. But know this, your courage will be remembered. His words stayed with them as they pressed on, giving them strength when the journey seemed too much to bear. When they finally reached the neighboring village, the mood was tense. The villagers, alerted to their arrival, gathered in a tight circle, their expressions a mix of suspicion and anger. The elders, dressed in vibrant robes adorned with beads and shells, stood at the center. Amina stepped forward, her head bowed. I come with humility, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. She held out the calabash, now cracked and worn. This does not belong to us. My ancestors took it from you, and it brought nothing but suffering to my family. I return it now, and I beg for your forgiveness. The elders exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Then, the eldest among them, a woman with silver hair and a voice as deep as the earth, stepped forward. She took the calabash from Amina's hands, her fingers brushing over the carvings. You have shown great bravery, child, she said, her tone solemn, to return what was stolen, knowing the danger it would bring. That is the mark of true repentance. She turned to the villagers, and raised the calabash high. "The curse is lifted," she declared. "Let harmony be restored." A traditional ceremony followed, filled with songs and chants that seemed to echo through the very ground. The elders burned incense and poured libations, their voices rising in prayer. As the smoke curled into the sky, Amina felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The air around her seemed lighter, freer. When the ceremony ended, the eldest elder approached Amina and Kojo. "You have done what few would dare to do," she said. "Go now with our blessing. May your family find peace." Amina and Kojo bowed deeply, their hearts filled with gratitude. When they returned to their village, the sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the familiar paths and rooftops. To their surprise, the villagers were waiting for them at the entrance. As they walked through, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. "You've brought honor to us all, Amina," an elder said, smiling warmly. Baba Kofi stood at the edge of the crowd, his face unreadable. As Amina approached, he stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low but steady. "I see that now. You have done what I could not. I am proud of you." Amina's throat tightened with emotion, but she managed a nod. "Thank you, Baba." That evening, as the family gathered for a meal, Zainab sat apart, her hands twisting in her lap. Finally, she stood and approached Amina. I was wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I let my jealousy blind me. Can you ever forgive me?" Amina looked at her stepmother for a long moment, then nodded. "The past is the past, Zainab. Let's move forward together." Zainab's eyes filled with tears as she nodded. For the first time in years, the family shared a meal in peace. In the weeks that followed, the griot sat beneath the ancient baobab tree, recounting Amina's journey to the next generation. His voice rose and fell like the wind, weaving a tale of courage, forgiveness, and the power of making amends. And so, he concluded, the calabash, once a symbol of greed, became a symbol of redemption. Let this story remind us that even the heaviest burdens can be lifted when we choose what is right. The children sat wide-eyed, their imaginations alight, while the elders nodded in approval. Amina's story had become a part of the village's history, a timeless lesson for all who would listen.